Welcome to the Alex Salmond Show, where we look at the future of the planet, about to be determined at COP26 in Glasgow. Is this, as American Special Climate Envoy John Kerry says, the last best hope for humanity? Or is it just another summit, long on rhetoric and short on delivery? Well, we ask Dr. Hugh of Cambridge University whether engineering and science can offer a solution to planetary warming. And on the eve of the summit, the Prime Minister dealt a huge blow to Scotland's hopes of leading the dash to the hydrogen economy by prioritising 2 English projects over the Scottish cluster. Alex asked Stuart Haszeldine, Professor of Carbon Capture and Storage at the University of Edinburgh, what to make of this apparent body blow to the Scottish economy. But first, to your tweets, emails and messages in response to our interview last week with Professor Akbar Ahmed on the prospects for a new understanding between the West and the Islamic world. First from Margaret Peden, who says, excellent interview, great show with Tasmanian and Alex, love it. Well, thank you, Margaret. And Faye Kennedy says, in relation to Christopher Lee being cast in the film Jinnah, he was indeed a great cast. William Nichols says, another sensible programme. Thank you, Professor, and all at the Alex Salmond Show. I do believe that the children will make the future better worldwide. Probably better if they were in charge now. Couldn't do any worse than the so-called leaders are doing at the moment. Stay safe, it's not over yet. Wise words from William. And of Professor Akbar's initiatives on the understanding between East and West, Ruth Laird says, I knew nothing of this. Thank you so much. Excellent. Arthur McMillan says, this is seriously fascinating stuff. And finally, Emsal Ahmed says, thank you for an informative interview with Professor Ahmed. And now over to Alex and Dr. Hugh Hunt.
Professor Hugh Hunt, welcome to the Alex Salmond Show.
I'm glad to be here.
Now, we're on the eve of COP26. Where are we exactly? I mean, do we have the capacity, scientifically or politically, to arrest global warming?
Well, we're not going to arrest global warming just like that. It's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of ambition, a lot of commitment, both scientifically and politically.
But we've had just this week, even the Prime Minister of Australia, who is known as a sceptic on these matters, seemed to commit himself to the zero carbon targets.
Committed to the net zero carbon target. And it's important to realise that there isn't a commitment to stop burning coal. There isn't a commitment to stop exporting coal. And to be net zero, you've got to find a way of getting the CO2 out of the atmosphere and underground or somewhere else.
So what you're saying is, we take sequestration, carbon capture, one of the great talking points of the last couple of weeks. You have to have the carbon to capture.
You have to have the carbon to capture. It's very convenient if you've got a coal-fired power station to make electricity. You've got a lot of carbon coming out of the flue, the chimney of the power station. Get that carbon dioxide underground if you've got a convenient place to store it. That's kind of fine. But once we stop burning fossil fuels, where is that neat concentrated carbon dioxide source going to be? Because in the atmosphere, the carbon dioxide is very dilute.
So you're looking at a stage beyond carbon capture. I mean, the world isn't even successfully deploying carbon capture, but you're already thinking, what's the stage beyond that?
The reason I'm thinking like that is that we don't have viable carbon capture and storage at scale yet. That's no doubt going to be perhaps viable in 10, 15, 20 years' time. But by that stage, we really ought not to be burning fossil fuels to generate electricity. Because we have options. We have solar, we have wind, we have nuclear if we're willing, we have tidal if we want, we have hydro, we have lots of options. We ought not to be burning fossil fuels to make electricity.
And of the innovative ideas that you're coming up with, I saw an article where you were thinking about how you can refreeze the Arctic. Is that a realistic proposal in any sense?
Well, so refreeze the Arctic is okay. It's a bit of a catchy catchphrase, but it is important to recognise that the Arctic region is warming maybe 3 times faster than the average for the planet. And if we lose, or when we lose, the summer ice in the Arctic, it's a bit like losing the ice in your glass of whatever it is. If there's ice
You shouldn't
floating
put
in
it in whiskey, incidentally.
There you go.
Just water and whiskey.
Okay, just water. Well, let's say it's a gin and tonic then. If there is ice, even the tiniest amount of ice, you can be pretty sure that that drink is cold. As soon as there's no ice, then the temperature in the Arctic, of the Arctic summer water temperature, will rise to what? We don't know. Underneath the Arctic is permafrost, which is then going to start melting. There's a lot of methane locked in there. Methane is a greenhouse gas. Then the Greenland ice shelf, which is already melting, the melting of that will accelerate. So it's not that we know how to refreeze the Arctic, but we know that it's really important that we figure out at least how to slow its rate of melting down.
Hey, you've been researching these matters for a substantial time. You're 30 years at Cambridge University. What mood do you detect among your students? Has there been a marked change in attitude towards these matters?
Well, the students 10 years ago perhaps were not even talking about this as a subject. Student activism was not about climate change. But right now, Greta Thunberg has accelerated it, but student activism on climate, the passion of students talking about climate is palpable. It's great. We've set up this Centre for Climate Repair at Cambridge, and the student interest in this whole area is amazing. We just don't have a shortage at all of students wanting to help doing projects on climate repair.
So, Professor Hunt, let's just say you are in Glasgow next week. Where would you rather be? Would you want to be outside the conference hall giving these world leaders a piece of your mind, or alternatively, would you like to be inside giving them a few solutions?
Well, I'm going to be there and I'm going to be outside, because that, I think, is where things are going to happen. Inside, it's very important that we have this political process, this legislative process, getting things right. But then what follows on from that is we've got to act on the commitments.
What many world leaders would say now is, say, look, we're almost halfway towards the targets which were embraced in Paris. And I suppose the answer is, but that was the easy half. For those who are halfway, of that remaining difficult half to meet, what are the most promising technologies that will provide the best answers?
Well, yes, the UK is almost halfway. The UK has done pretty well getting halfway by getting rid of coal. We've got a lot of gas. We've seen recently that gas is our kind of problem. How are we going to get off gas? We need more solar. Well, solar is not really our thing. In Scotland, there's hydro, which is fantastic. Wind, again, Scotland has got plenty of scope for wind. I think we're going to find this second half rather difficult.
And of that difficulty, what's the best hope? I mean, John Kerry says that Glasgow's the last best hope for humanity. Let's concentrate on the best hope. What is it, Professor Hunt?
I'm no fan of large-scale nuclear, but I wonder whether these small modular nuclear reactors will end up becoming favourable in certain places.
Will that not be another dream, like the fast reactor, like fusion, like the rest of it?
I don't think it's quite like that, because we do have small reactors in nuclear submarines. The technology at that small scale exists and is functioning and has become reliable and established. If it can become something that you and I would be happy, at least not too unhappy, to have somewhere near us knowing that it's safe, maybe that is the way to deal with this last half.
You spoke about repairing the planet. That's an interesting concept. You know, the planet, we've broken it, now it's time to fix it. What do you mean by that?
Well, we've got to stop burning fossil fuels, and we've got to get carbon dioxide and methane out of the atmosphere, those are very important. But we're probably not going to get those things done in time to rescue, say, the Arctic. The Arctic is melting fast, Antarctic following suit. So what technologies can we find to slow down or reverse the melting of the Arctic, the melting of the Himalayan glaciers? They're the sort of the big things. That's what I mean by repairing the planet.
And that means literally repairing the ocean itself.
The oceans are warm, so can we find ways of cooling the oceans? One thing we can do is to make clouds over the oceans whiter. There's an idea called marine cloud brightening, and we have students in Cambridge working on this. Lots of people around the world are working on this. Can we spray salt water, which is basically what wind does, waves make spray of salt water. It helps to create whiter clouds. So can we assist that process? Can we assist the oceans in increasing the amount of biomass? Biomass takes in CO2 from the air. Eventually it's taken up by organisms, whales, fish. They poo and the stuff sinks to the bottom. Can we increase the carbon uptake of the oceans?
So the oceans, which because of the consequences of human impact are the greatest threat and through the oceans rising, could also provide, since they cover 2/3 of this planet, the greatest solution.
The surface area of the oceans is enormous. So if you can imagine just 2% of the ocean's surface is, if you like, fertilised to improve its carbon dioxide uptake, that would have a huge impact.
Now let me take you back to the lecture halls of Cambridge University. Has there been an idea, concept forthcoming from your students that's made you thought, eureka, you know, there's something that these youngsters have come up with which might shape the future of the planet?
The thing I love about these wacky ideas you get from students, it reminds me a bit of Apollo 13, when there was that explosion, they were on the way to the moon, and look, there's no way we can get these 3 astronauts back. Not on my watch, we're getting them back. And the wacky ideas, which had been dismissed at the beginning, they're the ones that worked. My bet is that these students go and work somewhere, and that's where their wacky ideas find fertile soil.
Well, let's hope it's lucky for the planet. Professor Hugh Hunt of Cambridge University, thank you so much for joining me in the Alex Salmond Show.
It's been a pleasure.
Join us after the break when Alex examines why the Scottish proposals for carbon capture have been relegated by the UK government. We'll see you then. Welcome back. In a preview of the prospects of the vital COP26 summit in Glasgow, Alex speaks to Professor Stuart Haszeldine about the contribution which carbon capture can play in securing emission reductions.
I'm now delighted to be joined by Professor Stuart Haszeldine, the world's first ever professor of carbon capture and storage. Stuart, welcome to the Alex Salmond Show.
Glad to be here, Alex. Thank you for having me.
Now, when you got that appointment a few years ago now, the world's first ever professor of carbon capture and storage, when was that and how did it come about?
Well, that came about because in Scotland, around 2005, British Petroleum BP made the first bid to develop carbon capture and storage using a depleted oil field and using a power station. The UK government wasn't ready for that, so they pushed back on BP and created a competition. And into that competition came Scottish Power, which is our regional, if you like, electricity generator and distributor, trying to fit carbon capture onto the Longannet power station in the central part of Scotland. And as part of that research and development and industrial package, they thought it wise to sponsor a professor place at the University of Edinburgh. And so I'm the first professor of carbon capture and storage, still working on it, hope not to be the last.
So tell for our viewers, what exactly is carbon capture and storage? I mean, it's bandied about in terms of a number of technologies, but what in essence is the principles behind carbon capture?
Sure, I think that's important because using carbon in its various forms is a really important industrial process in our whole industrial society. So we use carbon out of the ground, coal, oil and methane gas to make electricity and to burn as heat, but we also use carbon out of the ground as feedstock into chemicals to make plastics and paints. We also use carbon out of the ground to make fertilizer and to help making in cement and iron and steel. And in all those processes, whether it's burning or as a feedstock, then the carbon often gets oxidized chemically to carbon dioxide. And at the moment, the carbon dioxide is just dumped in the atmosphere, and that drives climate change, whereas carbon capture and storage enables you to capture that carbon using a chemical absorption sponge, if you like. Instead of going up the chimney, the carbon dioxide gets captured. We can purify that, put that into a pipe, just like an oil and gas pipe, and send that away to be injected several kilometers down deep beneath the North Sea for storage, permanent storage forever. And that keeps the climate clean, but still lets us use the benefits of the fossil fuel.
And Stuart, how certain is that storage? I mean, you know, one thinks in the past of people say, oh, nuclear waste would be okay to store in deep underground. But I mean, isn't there a danger that the carbon dioxide would find its way out of these redundant oil wells?
Well, that's a great question, of course, and that's one which a lot of people ask. But we can be really very confident indeed that we have both a good understanding of how to make artificial carbon dioxide stores and a good rate understanding of how to manage those once we've made them. There's carbon dioxide deep beneath the North Sea, which has been there for 60 million years. There's carbon dioxide in Germany from the volcanoes in central Germany. There's carbon dioxide in Italy leaking out from the volcanoes, present volcanoes in Italy, and especially in the United States, in Colorado and Arizona. And we can go to these places and understand that we need to find a porous rock which has got small holes in it, overlain by an impermeable seal like the slates on the roof of your house. And that enables us to put the carbon dioxide into the holes in the microscopic holes in the rock, but stop that from leaking out with the roof on the top. And we know that can be secure and safe, not just for 10,000 years, which we need just now, but for 10 million or even 100 million years. So we've got really good confidence in this.
Now, we're on the eve of COP26 in the city of Glasgow. How essential, in your estimation, is carbon capture to fulfil the UK's climate targets and indeed the world's climate targets?
So the UK and other countries, but mainly the UK, have got a long way in reducing carbon emissions and reducing those harmful climate changing emissions. We've got about halfway towards the target of net zero. And the first part is the easy part. But to do the second part, you need to change people's behavior. You need to use different fuels. You need to change the way we work slightly. And as an essential part of that, we need to capture the rest of the carbon, which we can't just reduce by changing how we operate. We need to capture about a fifth or even a quarter of the carbon which we're presently emitting by carbon capture and storage. And that's common to all industrial countries. And to get to net zero, the UK Committee on Climate Change has really clearly supported carbon capture and storage for the past 10 years and has become more and more vociferous in its support for carbon capture and storage. And about a year and a half ago, they've famously said that carbon capture and storage is not an option, it's absolutely essential if any country is going to get to net zero. And that's a message to the politicians in charge who've really been dancing around the edge of the dance floor here instead of going in and making clear and bold decisions to develop this carbon capture and storage.
But of course, certain green organisations and indeed green politicians have said of academics like yourself, or indeed politicians like me who've been champions of carbon capture, that we're greenwashing, that we're trying to find an easy route or something like that. What's your answer to that accusation?
Well, I can understand why people make that type of accusation, because some of the large companies, to undertake this operation of capturing, transporting and storing, you need a large industrial actor, a company that's well accustomed to doing quite big industrial projects, because we need industrial solutions for this industrial problem that we've created. And a lot of those companies are oil and gas companies. And that leads to suspicion that they won't behave well. But that's really partly up to government to make the rules tight and make sure the rules are enforced. And so one rule we've got already is that the UK should decrease and decrease and decrease its carbon emissions with 5 yearly carbon budgets to end up with zero emissions in 2050. But another way of doing that is to make sure that companies are honouring what their shareholders want. And it's clear that the shareholders in companies like BP and Shell and Total and Mobil have all said that we want this oil company to be net zero and setting off and storing the carbon dioxide, which is a consequence of the fuels it's producing. So there's a double pincer movement on these companies. So they've got the skills, the politicians need to make the rules, and the shareholders will put them to account.
Now, I should mention that these projects have been in the offing for a long time, back to 2005, when I was obviously an advocate as the local MP of the Miller project at Peterhead Power Station, later as First Minister, the Longannet project. But both of these ideas were sunk by the UK government. Now, would it be reasonable to say if either of these had gone ahead, then the delegates to COP26 in Glasgow this weekend would be getting on a bus and touring to see these wondrous carbon capture projects? Well, what's the extent of the missed opportunity over these last 15 years?
Well, I think the UK's had 4 cycles, 4 sets of opportunity at least in this. So once with the BP project you mentioned in 2005, again with the Longannet project, 2007, cycling back, trying again in 2015 with a project around Peterhead, which is a power station in northeast Scotland. And again, most recently with a project based around industry, is the so-called Acorn project in Scotland. And each time that has been done, the design brief has been very fully achieved. As with the Acorn project, we know that we've got full marks in all of the categories. I think we've got the most deliverable project, we've got the least cost project, we've got the best skills, we can explain what we're doing. But each time, mysteriously, somehow, once that package of application goes in to the Westminster complex, somewhere the rules get adapted and Scotland seems to be a loser all the time. And that's crazy, because the world needs this. The UK needs this, and Scotland is still, for better or worse, part of the UK. And if we'd developed these from 2005 onwards, we would indeed be touring global delegates round our 3rd or even 4th generation of carbon capture and storage power plants, carbon capture and storage on industry, and saying, don't just believe what we say. Here is the metal, here is the pipework, here is the operation. You guys can do this too. And the world would be in a much better place. Instead of progressively increasing carbon emissions in the atmosphere each year, we'd have turned that curve over and we'd be decreasing towards net zero. So this is a global failure, and it starts here in the UK.
And this relegation of the Acorn project, the Scottish cluster, I mean, this is more than just the loss of potentially tens of thousands of jobs. But this is almost a dagger aimed at the heart of the Scottish industrial structure. I mean, what future can there be for offshore oil and gas around Scotland if there isn't a means of disposing of the carbon dioxide? What future for Grangemouth refinery if there isn't a method of stopping damaging emissions?
So I think those are all points exactly on target, because the whole explanation of why the Westminster government's gone through this current cycle of competition is to try and take carbon emissions away from all these industrial areas around the UK. So there are industrial areas in Teesside in the northeast of England, there's industrial areas in Hull and Humberside, industrial areas around Manchester, because the UK, thanks to the Industrial Revolution and burning lots of coal and then lots of oil, is a very industrial country. So if those industries are to have a future, they need to be decarbonised. We need to find a way of taking the carbon, capturing the carbon, as I explained earlier, taking that away and putting that deep underground in a safe storage site. And Northeast Scotland is absolutely ideal for that. And what we can do here is start quickly. We can develop at very low cost by reusing a lot of that oil and gas equipment. We have a lot of skills for the offshore industry, which are well familiar with building pipelines and operating all that equipment offshore very safely and securely. And we have a set of European oil companies who have been asked by their shareholders to get down to net zero and store carbon. And those companies are really wanting to cluster around projects, but that needs the government to give permission and needs the government of the UK to give some encouragement and permission and initial financial awards to permit that to proceed. And that's persistently been missed all the time. So we're on the fourth cycle. And once again, this has been missed, this perfect combination of conditions.
Well, hopefully, Professor Haszeldine, this opportunity will come again. I want one last question, and that's, when you're lecturing and teaching your students at Edinburgh University, how seized are these young people with the idea of carbon capture, that they, by their studies and hopefully by their careers, may be making a substantial contribution to saving our planet? Is there a real zeal behind the carbon capture enthusiasts?
There absolutely is, yes, and that's embedded as part of a whole wider package at the University of Edinburgh. But carbon capture and storage is certainly one of the standout activities. And every time I lecture to multiple different classes of undergraduates or to students coming in from around the world to take master's courses at advanced level, those classes are always very keen, very enthused, ask lots of questions, go away, talk to their friends about it. So there's no doubt that we have the skills and ability, we've got the training to offer. Actually, all we need is some real projects now where we can effectively go and knock on the door, kick the tires and go and see it happening.
Professor Stuart Haszeldine, good luck with all you're doing, and thank you so much for joining me on the Alex Salmond Show.
A pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
The world is warming and the crisis is upon us. But are the leaders and their entourage of 25,000 up to the task in hand in Glasgow? The auguries are not good. Neither President Xi of China nor President Putin of Russia will even be in attendance. The host country's First Minister is not invited as part of the UK delegation. If leaders in the UK are incapable of putting aside personal rivalries in the run-up to the summit, then what hope is there for substantial decisions requiring real sacrifice? Boris Johnson has been sounding uncharacteristically pessimistic in the run-up to COP, stressing the difficulties in agreeing joint action. This may be a deliberate tactic, looking to under-promise and over-deliver. For example, rumour has it that the investment fund of an annual £100 billion of climate finance, first promised to the developing world in 2009, will be announced in Glasgow as finally being met. However, in the real world, gas and coal prices have soared to record highs, and the refusal of the UK government to prioritise carbon capture in Scotland leaves a bitter taste. That, for the Prime Minister, political priority trumps climate logic. It remains to be seen whether Glasgow 2021 will be seen itself as a turning point or another missed opportunity. But for now, from Alex, myself and all at the show, it's goodbye, stay safe, and we hope to see you all again next week.